You know, in my opinion, when you think of NASCAR controversies, of course there's going to be bad ones you think of, but there's a lot of them that really can help the sport move forward in whichever ways are needed. And again, while there's some pretty bad ones, there's some that, in my opinion, are so mind-numbingly dumb. Some that are so avoidable that you kind of wonder how NASCAR and those that are in NASCAR got themselves in that position to begin with. So today we're going to look back at 7 of the dumbest NASCAR controversies. Starting out, we're going to look at something that I'm sure is not divisive in any way, the 2013 NRA 500 at the Texas Motor Speedway. Now, for those of you who might not know or don't live in America, the NRA is one of the most controversial groups in American politics, so them as a sponsor is sure to draw the emotion and ire of many, as well as the support of many more. And you add to this that in 2013, when this race had taken place, it was in pretty much the aftermath of the Sandy Hook shooting. Well, you had a powder keg ready to explode. When this was announced, you saw this everywhere. It was on Fox, on conservative radio, everywhere like that, as well as more liberal and left-leaning political channels, such as that of MSNBC and CNN. This continued over and over again to the point where many were protesting, and even many in the industry were calling for the race to be changed, and many in TV were calling for the race to not even be shown by Fox. Fox, in a way to try and mitigate the controversy, had the NRA's name mentioned only once per hour, which is the standard bare minimum for NASCAR broadcasting. Though I gotta say, as somebody who watched a race live, I don't remember ever hearing the name of the race during the broadcast. Maybe I just wasn't a keen ear at the time, but I really don't remember hearing much of it. Now, the reason why it was very avoidable and a dumb controversy is that it was completely avoidable by just getting another sponsor. Well, let's get a little levity and get away from more pressing issues and go down to just a good old-fashioned screw job. And that's what happened to Carl Edwards in the 2006 Budweiser Shootout. Listen, the double line rule for me has been one of the dumbest rules that NASCAR's made, and it's led to plenty controversial moments since the 2001 season. You can look at Dale Jr. in 2003 in the Aaron's 499, his pass for the lead that was very questionable, but NASCAR ruled okay. Then you can look at Regan Smith in 2008, where he made a move under the yellow line after Stewart forced him, tried to make his way back up, and NASCAR deemed it not fair. And then, of course, you have Carl Edwards getting into a flip because Brad Keselowski held his ground and didn't want to end up the same way Regan Smith did. But in the 2006 Bud Shootout, Carl Edwards had a day. When he was avoiding an accident in the closing stages of the race, Edwards went below the yellow line as a lot of cars were slowing down for green flag pit stops. He passed Kyle Busch and Jimmy Johnson, but in turn was passed by 3 other cars, so he had a net loss in positions. NASCAR would not budge whatsoever on this. They ruled that he had passed cars below the yellow line, didn't matter the reason why, he needed to serve a pass-through penalty. Carl was reasonably irate with this, and at first said that he wasn't going to be serving the penalty. But when he did, NASCAR conveniently dinged him for speeding right after he talked back to them over and over again. So, he did what any reasonable person would do. He just quit the race. No wonder that he retired if this was the stuff that he was having to put up with from time to time. It was completely avoidable, as NASCAR could deem that, hey, Carl was avoiding a wreck. That is in and of itself a good enough reason to go below the yellow line so that he didn't end up ass-packing someone. Now, the next controversy is that of Pitbull, but not Mr. Worldwide, but instead the 2004 debate show that was on the Speed Channel. Every week, they debate everything in the world of NASCAR and be incredibly critical of the moves NASCAR made, especially in their show-ending segment where they would give their beef of what they thought NASCAR did wrong that week. Well, the show was heavily criticized for going overboard with criticism, being really incessant with their criticism, and they were even pegged as being anti-NASCAR by those who supported NASCAR's decisions and by many in the industry themselves. The hosts included guys like Steve Burns, David Poole, Marty Smith, and even Robin Miller, all of those who have invested tons of their life into motorsports and NASCAR, especially at times. So I would say they weren't anti-NASCAR. I'd say they actually were the most pro-NASCAR of any of these people that we're talking. The show ultimately got canceled for low ratings, though many had assumed it was because NASCAR asked the Speed Channel and Fox Sports and everyone involved with it to take the show off the air. And ultimately, it led to the NASCAR community openly celebrating this in the awards banquet.
Thank you very much. Good evening. That was very nice of you. Was that really for me, or were you just happy that you found out Pitbulls was canceled? See, that, you got to give me some credit for that. That's gutsy, because now David Poole's going to write something nasty about me tonight.
Now, let's stick with the 2004 season and a moment that I'm sure was definitely talked about on Pitbulls, and that is Dale Jr.'s 2004 comments after he won at Talladega. In the 2004 season, Jr. was having the best season of his career and was easily the favorite for the championship after a couple races in the inaugural chase for the Nextel Cup. He was in an intense battle with Kurt Busch for the lead, and at Talladega, he jumped on that and dominated the race, winning it and taking the points lead in the process. Then, in an interview after the race with Matt Yoakum, he let the emotion get the best of him. Now, it's important to note that Jr. earlier in the season had gotten in trouble with NASCAR for cussing on TV, and NASCAR was not going to be too kind to him. They docked him $10,000 and 25 driver's points, moving him from first in the Nextel Cup Series points to second. This is completely avoidable by finding him more money and putting him on probation. Fifth one on this list is starting parking. For those of you who may be too young to remember this is the phenomenon where teams would qualify for a race, start the race, run a few laps, then bring their cars into pit road, into the garage before the first round of stops that they had. This would be in an attempt to gain as much money as possible without having to spend too much during the race weekend so that later on the team could hypothetically be more competitive. Fans called it an embarrassment to the sport and began to give huge issues to NASCAR about it, as this really became a large issue in the late 2000s when the sport took a downturn. It was one of the many things that people had accused the sport of having wrong with it and why less people watched, except this was something that had happened in the sport for decades, off and on, depending on the way you look at it. In the 2000s, at NASCAR's height and popularity, this was going on. But NASCAR had to do something as fans were upset with it. So over time, they made more and more rules, culminating in the charter system, which would over time eliminate all of these teams from existing. Nowadays, the closest thing you have to starting parks is different cars like the 44 or the 50 or the Rick Ware cars being abnormally slow and off the pace, but they don't start and park. What way was this avoidable? I think at the time, if NASCAR had been better at distributing TV money to the teams and to the purse, I think that start and parking would have been less of a necessity. But of course, with more money, the teams could have spent more and it probably would have stayed a problem. This is probably the least avoidable of any of these controversies on this list. Now, the sixth one on this list is probably the saddest one on, depending on who you ask, and that is Drunken Brian France's fiasco. Drunken Brian France was a parody Twitter account poking fun at the NASCAR CEO, Brian France. For the longest time, this was just one of the most popular parody accounts in the community, but it was nothing more than that. But in August of 2018, Brian France was arrested for driving under the influence while being drunk and was removed as CEO. He was also found in possession of 5 pills of oxycodone and since has been away from NASCAR, except in 2020 when they invited Donald Trump to the Daytona 500. In 2020, France filed a lawsuit accusing the account of trying to impersonate him and trying to trick people in the public to thinking it was him because, in a way, he was playing a caricature and saying, I am doing all stuff like that. And this went public and many people laughed it off. There was no way that a parody account would be taken off and be taken seriously like this. But the worst thing of all of this, Brian France won the suit and the account was deleted. The avoidable thing in all of this? Don't drive under the influence. Now, last but not least on this list is politicians and politics in general being at races. As a culture, America has been getting more and more divided on cultural and also political lines. So in the last couple years, this has really become a major issue for fans. And a lot of fans on both sides have been saying to keep politics out of racing. Well, there's been faces put to this controversy. Even though NASCAR invited politicians for years and even decades to races and have had great stories out of it, it has become more and more unacceptable as it's just causing fights with the fans and turning a lot of people off of the sport. And there's three that I really want to highlight here. Again, I don't care what your political affiliation is, doesn't mean jack squat to me. Now, the first one is most recent. Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, being at the All-Star race. This started up an internet firestorm, and there was a lot of people that weren't at the race that were unhappy, and a lot of people at the race that were happy with this. Then you got Donald Trump in 2020, the president of the United States, one of the most divisive presidents for a lot of people, being at the 2020 Daytona 500. And then you have in 2011, First Lady Michelle Obama, and then Second Lady Jill Biden being at the Homestead race for the finale, and they were booed by the fans. This took the airwaves and really overshadowed Tony Stewart and Carl Edwards' big battle for the championship that culminated in a tie. The easiest way to avoid all this? Actually keep politics out of NASCAR. Now, with that covers everything we got, and I want to pass this on to you. What are some of the dumbest controversies that are really just avoidable controversies that you remember in NASCAR history? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content. Thank you to all my channel members for your support of this channel. And until next time, have a good one.